Welcome to another episode of the Michael Yardney podcast. Today I'm joined by Stuart Wemyss to discuss two, I think great topics. The first one's about the life cycle of property investors, and you're going to find it's a roadmap that provides insights into the ebbs and flows of the financial journey you're going to be experiencing as a property investor, and in fact, more importantly, the strategic decisions you're going to have to make along the way. And then we're going to talk about a concept of giving your children, your grandchildren, an early inheritance rather than waiting till you die. Now, even if you don't have children or grandchildren yet, you're somebody's child, so this could be very relevant to you. So let's get on with the show.
Welcome to the Michael Yardney podcast, where twice each week you will learn a number of new ideas regarding success, property investment, and money in around 30 minutes. Our show is brought to you by Metropole, who specialise in helping you grow, protect and pass on your wealth through strategic property and wealth advice. Now here's your host, Michael Yardney, Australia's authority in wealth creation through property, who has been voted one of Australia's top 50 most influential thought leaders.
Over the years, I've come to appreciate that property investing is a complex affair, and despite all the podcasts, the blogs, the webinars, and the many so-called advisors, the fact is that most investors fail to achieve the financial freedom they're looking for. I also learned that the various market participants are playing a wide range of games. They've each got their own unique goals, attitudes, timeframes, risk profiles, and incentives. The problem is, I think most investors haven't actually worked out what game they're playing or they should be playing. Maybe they've got a vague idea of their game, but they haven't really defined it. And when you don't know the game you're playing, you're at risk of taking cues and advice from people playing a different game, which leads to risks that investors didn't ever expect, intend, and they're not getting the outcomes they wanted. So today I'm joined by my regular guest, independent financial advisor Stuart Wemyss, Director of Pro Solution Private Clients. In a recent blog and also in his Investopoly podcast, Stuart outlined the typical life cycle of investor, detailing the different stages people go through and the financial decisions they've got to make at each stage, from starting out to starting a family. Anyway, we'll go through all that in a moment. So I'm really keen to get Stuart's thoughts to give you an idea of where you should be. And then there's also another topic I'd like to discuss with him, the concept of maybe giving away some of your inheritance with a warm hand rather than a cold hand when you die. So welcome, Stuart.
Hey, Michael. Great to be back with you.
Now, Stuart, I love getting your regular blogs every Wednesday, and I'd commend people to subscribe to your Investopoly podcast as well. And I mentioned just now about how we are playing different games at different stages of our investment career. And you outlined that very well in a blog, because really what you should be doing when you start off isn't the same as what you should be doing at the end. But I see many people being enticed by spruikers, by offers that they get in their email, which aren't appropriate for the stage of the game they're playing.
Yeah, that's right, Michael. And the thing that made me really think about this blog topic was an observation I made many years ago, where I would meet prospective clients and they'd say, look, this is our situation. We just don't know what to do next. You know, should we go and buy an investment property? Should we contribute to super? You know, should we be paying down debt? Should we be doing something completely different? And when after a bit of discussion to really understand their situation and goals and future and all those sorts of things, to me it was relatively easy to kind of work out, well, what should they do next? And that's what made me come up with the idea to write the book Investopoly, which sort of takes you through 8 rules that you can apply to sort of work out what I should do next in the next stage. And so I guess this topic is really almost to a small degree a summation of that. I can't remember who wrote the quote, but I read a quote recently, and the person was a financial commentator, and they said there's only really 6 or 7 things to talk about. You know, if you're not interested in just coming up with some sort of clickbait and crazy sort of projections just to attract attention or anything like that, if you're really just interested in writing about fundamentally sound ideas, there's only 6 or 7 things to write about. And so you just write about them in very different ways. And I think that's true. And there's only a handful of things you need to know about building wealth and making financial decisions and so forth. A lot of it is just very basic math.
I think that's a really good starting point, because a lot of people, when they start, Stuart, think I've got to learn a million things. No, you don't. You need to understand a few fundamentals well. And the others are really just variations of those few basics, aren't they?
Yeah, and look, maybe it's not a good analogy, but if we think about building a house, right, we don't need to become engineers or carpenters or whatever. We know that, with very basic knowledge, we know that, the foundations of a house need to be sound. It's going to have walls. There's going to be a roof. We need to have a logical floor plan. Now, we don't need to be experts in, as I said, engineering, but we just need to know the basics to be able to build that house or to direct the people that are going to build that house. I think finance is the same. You just need to know the basics, what's going to work, what's the right time, how much should you borrow, when should you borrow, those sorts of considerations, and then you can get the experts around you to fill in the gaps. But it's the strategy that you need to have right, and that's what I wanted to sort of try and pull apart.
Okay, well, let's go through the various typical stages. Now, there's not a one-size-fits-all, but what did you decide was the typical journey of a property investor?
Obviously when people finish school, university, whatever they might do, they get their first job and they start earning an income. So we'll start really from the beginning, if you like. The first thing they need to do is work out how to manage cash flow effectively. And there's really two main reasons for that. First one is that good cash flow management principles will follow you throughout the rest of your life and serve you incredibly well. If you can nail it from the beginning, it's a lot easier to course correct later on. Let's talk about almost like a diet or nutrition or eating. If you can learn those healthy habits at the beginning, before if you don't and you end up putting on 20 kilos, it's a big ship to turn around and a big life change to kind of course correct and stay. So if you can build those good sort of cash flow or money habits from the beginning, that's going to be really valuable. And I think the one thing I would say about cash flow management is it's not about eliminating all spending, and it's not about not enjoying life either. It's about making really good conscious decisions about what you're spending your money on. And if you don't consciously make those decisions, you'll end up wasting money on things that aren't really actually important to you and don't change your standard of living. So the first thing I think people need to do is understand that there's lots of tools and commentary and apps and there's a heap of information that's available these days. Most of it's for free to help people kind of work out how to manage that and to sort of enjoy the investment journey as well. As I said, you need to carve off a little bit of income and savings to enjoy today, and then, of course, allocate some to invest tomorrow as well. So cash flow management's important from that perspective. And the second reason why cash flow management is important is because I think the first thing that people need to do is go and buy a property. And if I have really good cash flow management, what it will do is demonstrate to me, and then also eventually the bank, that I can, in fact, afford to take on a mortgage commitment.
That makes a lot of sense. And even the earlier in the piece you do buy your first property, and I know you started early in your life, so did I, and we didn't necessarily make the best decisions in those days because we didn't know, but time covers those mistakes if you don't make too bad a decision. And today, with all the information that's out there, it's actually much easier to make the right decision. I guess having said that, we still find that probably property investors did better before there was all this information, because there's also so much misinformation out there.
Yeah, and too much information makes it even more difficult to make a decision. The reason why it's important to buy a property as your first step to building wealth isn't because of property. It's solely because of the gearing. And so if we think about, someone that's just starting out in life, they tend to be income rich and asset poor, which is, their income, particularly as they're growing a career and they're investing in themselves and they're really progressing and through in terms of their career and promotions and so forth, that the income element they're working on, and we all start earning a very low income and we gradually increase it, but that's not our problem. Our problem is the fact that we don't have really an asset base, or our asset base is very small. So really the first goal or first tactic should be, how am I going to increase that asset base? I don't really need any more income per se, because I'm probably paying for my living expenses and retirement is certainly some way down the track. It's really just about turning that income into a really strong asset base. And the quickest way to do that is gearing. And the easiest way to use gearing is through property, because you can borrow a much larger portion of the property, and plus also property has half the volatility of rate of shares. So that's why that should be someone's first point of call. Now, whether it's a home or investment, I don't really care, and it doesn't really matter, so long as the property is higher quality as your budget will allow. So another way to put it is go and buy yourself an investment property, and if you want to, if after you've purchased it, you want to occupy it, fine. If you want to put a tenant in there and you're still living at home with your parents or share in a shared house or whatever, then that's fine too. Doesn't really matter.
So there's nothing new about this. What you've got to do is spend less than you earn, save it. And at the moment, in fact, savings rates are higher than they've been for quite some time. And once you've got a saving, once you've got the discipline, once you've got enough for a deposit, then go to the bank and let them help you gear to get into property. But if you haven't got enough deposit at the moment, Stuart, there's a number of other ways too. Family guarantees, the bank of mum and dad are also helping. Now, what about people, if a client would ask you, well, I'm thinking of starting a family. Should I actually buy a property now or wait till I've got a family?
So the problem with having a family, I was going to say,
okay, you got to be careful where you go with this. Yeah,
I know. Okay, one of the financial problems with having a family is that it's expensive.
Yes,
your income typically reduces for a period of time as one or both spouses reduce or even stop work completely, and also your expenses are much higher as well. So that's really the most difficult time to build wealth in someone, as a general observation in someone's life cycle. So once you decide to have kids, and those kids are young and they need daycare, or someone needs to be at home with them, or whatever arrangements you might have, you really need to make friends that the next sort of 5 years or so, depending on how many kids you have, of course, you're probably going to tread water financially. So therefore, if people have that sort of foresight, then hopefully what they will consider is trying to get as much investing done before they start a family. If someone that's just starting out, their first goal is cash flow management, go and buy a property, then the question is, what do you do between buying that first property and starting a family, if that's what you want to do? And about 75% of people end up getting married and having kids, so that's kind of the general rule. And the answer would be to increase your level of gearing. If it's safe to do and it's possible to do and you're comfortable to do it, that's what your focus really should be. Now, you don't want to increase it too much, or at least to the extent where it prevents you from having a family, that both parents now have to go to work because you're so highly geared. Of course, that's silly unless you can build some cash flow buffers in. So you need to be cognizant of that. But really, the strategy should be as much gearing as possible that's in fact safe to do. So that could be buying a family home. It could be upgrading your previous home. It could be buying a second investment property. Again, it doesn't really matter what it is. I mean, a home's a good investment because it's tax-free capital growth, of course. So there's not too many things that are tax-free, so we should really take advantage of it. But really, it's about the quality of the asset rather than how you use that asset, whether it's a tenant or an unoccupied property.
Now, when you buy your first investment property, there are suddenly expenses, in particular the mortgage, but you've got rent coming in. But if you've got two incomes, there's often still additional cash flow, surplus cash flow. It's not the right time at the moment to discuss it, but I think it's important to know where to put it and what to do with that. And I know that's what you at your team at Pro Solutions do as part of your strategic planning, and same with us at Metropole, because you've got to keep it in the right slot rather than necessarily paying down your mortgage, especially if you're going to have an investment property or make your investment property your home or make your home your investment property in the future, to make it as flexible as possible. So frequently the suggestion is to put it in an offset account and keep it separate. Don't taint personal expenses, personal cash flow with investment expenses.
Yeah, that's right, Michael. So if I've got a client that is considering starting a family, but we want to complete a transaction before that occurs, a home upgrade, investment, whatever it might be, the thing that I will first think about is how can I preserve as much cash savings as possible as a buffer. And we hope that, we still make all the decisions and their income is enough to pay for their expenses, even when they do start a family. But the point is that if interest rates increase much higher than we expect, or there are a change in circumstances, if we have 100,000 or more in the offset account, we've got that buffer to kind of fall back on, and it buys us time to make whatever decisions we need to make in order to navigate through whatever changes that have occurred. So holding on to the cash in an offset account is really valuable and really helps you probably take a little bit greater risk with respect to borrowing than you otherwise would if you didn't have those cash savings.
Well, a financial strategy isn't really about the lowest interest rates or even how much you can borrow, but it's actually how you protect yourself. So what you said is, I know that you and your team, and we also similarly think that our investors, clients should buy themselves time as well as properties, because boy, have there been so many examples in the last few years of unknowns coming out of the blue to test your cash flow management. As we're working through the life cycle of an investor or a person, I guess one of the other things we should explain is that we've insinuated that, suggested it, but that those first investments should be aimed at building capital growth. In other words, the aim of this is over the long term to get the benefit of compounding. Yet I see many beginning investors looking to invest for cash flow. And that's partly because they haven't got enough or they don't know how to manage it. But we both believe that residential real estate's a high growth, relatively lower yield investment. So I'd be suggesting don't look for, at the moment, the fad is commercial property. In the old days, it was regional property. Prior to that, it was mining towns, which were the hot spots where you got more cash flow. That's not what you should be aiming at, in my opinion, Stuart.
Yeah, that's right. And probably one of the greatest ironies in life is that younger people tend to think too shorter term and older people tend to think very long term, probably because they've just learned the lessons of life. But really, as a younger person, so someone in their 20s or even 30s, should really be thinking about what property can I buy today? So in 10 and 20 years, that property is going to be worth 2 to 4 times the value over that period of time. And 10 years to a 25-year-old seems like a lifetime. And relative to their age, it is, almost 40% of what they've lived. So, of course, seems like a long time. But what it does is it forces you to make a good, fundamentally sound financial decision. It forces you to really focus on the property fundamentals and drown out all the short-term noise, because all the noise in the media and so forth tends to be very short-term by nature because it's trying to attract attention. But by focusing on that longer term outcome, that's really the best thing that you can do.
Okay, so as we go through their life stage, the sort of investments you need will be different. So initially it's basically asset growth. Down the track, and we'll get to that in the lifestyle, maybe it is important to now end up getting more cash flow and lowering your loan to value ratios. But there's that period in the middle where you have kids, and then a lot of people are keen to send their kids to private schools. Boy, that's expensive nowadays, Stuart. So you're out of the market for a while.
People talk about how expensive private schools are, and they are, of course. But childcare is just as expensive, sometimes more expensive than private school fees, and it doesn't get as much airtime. There could be a period of opportunity between when your kids are school age and they're going to school and you kind of recover some of your family income and your expenses normalize. But before, and if you're planning on sending them to private school, before they go to secondary private school. And so whilst the kids are in primary school and maybe a public primary school, often a person's cash flow or individual family's cash flow is greatly improved in that period of time. And so that's when you want to start thinking about, again, what is your next move? I find people in this age and stage of life, it's really about upgrading their home. Typically, they want to upgrade either because they want to get into a school zone, a good secondary school zone, or closer to the desired secondary school. And they need eventually more accommodation because obviously they're growing family. Babies don't take up much space, but teenagers, you want to be as far away as possible from teenagers, trust me.
Yes, them upstairs, you downstairs, things like that.
That's right. Build a big wall. Got to build the wall, as Trump would say. Anyway, and really the sooner you can upgrade your home, the sooner you can actually execute on that, the better off you are. Because obviously prices trend higher over time. And so the longer I delay upgrading my home, I know the probability is the more that it's going to cost me. and I've got to pay that cost from after-tax dollars because obviously it's not tax deductible. So what I try to encourage people to do, and also, if you upgrade your home into a good area and that home's going to derive good capital growth, it's actually a good thing to do financially as well. I know we don't buy our home to build wealth. Primarily, it's a lifestyle decision. But if everything goes bad and we end up with a whole bunch of equity in our home, that's a good thing because it gives us some flexibility. So during that period, I'm normally talking to clients about, okay, where do you want to live longer term? What sort of type of house you're looking for? And if we can execute and make that move now, that's a kind of a good time to do it. And if they've done all the right moves before that, like invested well in property and borrowed as soon as they were able to and managed cash flow well, they're well positioned then to execute and make that move.
Then eventually the kids grow up and some leave home, some go and then come back. But in their 50s, I've found a lot of our clients seem to have a period where they've got improved cash flow again. Firstly, their incomes have gone up. Sometimes the wife's gone back to work as well. And they're now looking to invest and they're seeing a window of opportunity of 10, 15 years before they want to get out of the workforce. It's a shame when we see people come at that stage and all they've got's their home. Isn't it much nicer when they've already had a couple of investment properties that have been just quietly working in the background, building their wealth? But again, this is a time where people can't afford to get it wrong because they haven't got the long runway that beginning investors who start earlier on in life have.
And certainly we've been talking mostly about property until now. And the reason for that is because property is such a lumpy asset and we want to benefit from compounding capital growth over the long run. So, of course, the sooner we buy property, the better. But when we're in our 50s, a couple of things have happened. Certainly, maybe the kids have left home, or at least they're less expensive and maybe a little bit more independent. Our income we've probably maximised our income in terms of income earning capacity in terms of our occupation. When you're in your early 50s, that's probably where your maximum is going to be. And so your cash flow is greatly improved as well. And then I find people talking a lot more these days about partial retirement or stage retirement rather than full and permanent retirement. So they might be then thinking, look, mid-late 50s, I'd like to reduce to 3 days a week or something like that. So in this age and stage of life, it's really about making sure debt's under control. Certainly by the time you get to 60, you hopefully don't have a home loan, and that any investment property debt isn't too over the top in terms of cash flow wise. And then investing in liquid assets, more liquid assets that give you more flexibility like shares and so forth, that can then help that transition and replace part of your earned income so that you can go down to 3 days a week or whatever the goal is. So it's really a bit of a consolidation stage, concentrate on building your super, of course, and then building other liquid assets outside of super that are going to give you that flexibility to retire sooner.
I think that's a really important point because I know you and think similarly to me that property is a great asset class, but it's not only property. So if anybody tells you property only, run away really quickly. They've got a vested interest. Or if they say shares only, I guess much the same. You need a blend, and each person has got a different requirement. But even today, residential real estate isn't a really good cash flow play. It's a great capital growth play, but it's hard to take cash out of your residential real estate investments. And that's why it may be, in the latter years, a good time to consider commercial property, which doesn't have as high a capital growth, but has more cash flow. But there are other issues with that with regard to finance and fluctuating a bit in different stages of the cycle. You're right. That's why I think it's important also to get somebody independent to put some financial planning ideas to you. Property is hard to live off just on its own. You need too big a property portfolio at a very lowish loan to value ratio to be able to live off your equity or your loans like you used to pre-GFC.
And I like to think about it as not really a property versus share decision. It's a gearing versus no gearing decision. So if I'm young and I've got many years of income ahead of me, then gearing is really going to do all the heavy lifting in terms of helping me build wealth. But if I'm in my 50s and closer to retirement, then I probably shouldn't be borrowing very much at that age and stage of life, and I should have ungeared investments like shares. And the other benefit is, property is a great asset because of compounding capital growth, but it's a liquid asset. I can't go and sell 5%. Whereas with a share portfolio, I can sell $10,000 or $20,000 of shares a year, and as a result, the capital gains tax consequences I can manage and spread over many years, and it's very flexible. So even if I want to keep working 5 days, but just want to have something up my sleeve, so that I can reduce working hours if I want to, well, shares are going to give you that flexibility, whereas property, not so much.
And then eventually you get into your 60s and you may retire, you may want to slow down, as you say, Stuart, or work part-time, or you may still want to continue on. But the baby boomers didn't have the benefit of that many years of superannuation. The younger generations may not realise that compulsory superannuation wasn't around when I was younger. Having said that, I set up my own self-managed super fund in the 1970s, and it's built quite a substantial asset base now. So there's different rules, and I bet they're going to change over time anyway, about when you can start accessing your super. If you're working full-time, if you've retired, there are different rules. But you've got to actually plan before you get to that stage. So we've spoken about it before. I like the concept of having your own home with no debt against it when you get to that stage. You don't really want to have non-tax deductible debt in your retirement or in your golden years. I'd like to see people have a substantial asset base of residential real estate, but with low enough loan to value ratios that they're at least washing their face, that it may be over. And this is not advice, because we can't give superannuation or other financial advice in this forum, but the concept could well be that maybe for the first 10 years of your retirement, you'd live off your super, allowing your property portfolio to keep increasing, the loan to value ratios to drop further and become more cash flow positive. So you have super, your home, residential real estate, plus, as you said, your liquid assets in one form or another, and they could well be shares or managed funds or things like that. That's a good way to fall into retirement.
Couldn't have said it any better. Yeah, bang on. No debt against the home, self-funding investment property portfolio. We don't actually want it necessarily to give us any income, and that shouldn't necessarily be your aim, because if it is giving you income, arguably maybe your gearing is actually too conservative, and there's such a thing as having too low a debt. It's actually quite efficient to have some level of debt. And then we would say, well, super and other assets, if you've got some shares, might fund, let's call it the first phase of retirement, whatever that might be, 10, 15, 20 years. And what property is going to do is underpin the super. So if super doesn't perform as we expect, or returns are terrible, or you end up spending more than you anticipated, you've got these properties working in the background in terms of compounding capital growth. And by that stage, you've probably owned the properties for 3 or 4 decades. So the compounding growth really kicks in massively, particularly in dollar terms. And so you might have a portfolio that might be increasing by, on average, not every year, of course, $300,000 or $400,000 a year. By that stage, you don't need huge percentage gains to achieve large dollar value gains after holding property for 30 or 40 years. So, and then eventually, if your super does run down, you might then turn your mind to divesting of 1 or 2 properties to replenish those savings. But hopefully, those properties are going to end up to be kind of surplus assets, which you might be able to use to sort of create some intergenerational wealth.
Well, interestingly, that has meant that there is going to be a very significant intergenerational wealth transfer. A number of different organisations have made some estimates of what's ahead. The baby boomer generation in particular own properties with limited or no debt. We know that 50% of home owners don't have any debt against their home, but because they bought it 30, 40 years ago, and that's going to be passed on to their children. It depends whose statistics you read. The suggestion has been that could be $3.5 trillion worth of inheritance bequeathed over the next decade, and that would get much, much higher by 2050. But I was also interested to read that a large amount of this intergenerational wealth creates family conflicts, family disputes. I've read that in your blog, and I know Ken Race was telling me something very similar. So one way to avoid this is to actually give some of your wealth away with a warm hand, but before you die, rather than with a cold hand. And I know this was the topic of another one of your blogs. I'm in the fortunate position that I've been able to help all our kids with accommodation, and I'm now paying for my grandchildren's school fees. So I'm personally doing this, and I figured I'd rather give it to them now and see them enjoy their lives while they can, rather than give it to them I hope I'm going to be around for a lot longer, give it to them later on when it's going to be fun for them, but not as important in their life. So what are your thoughts on giving away inheritance earlier in life?
It's true that, we do typically receive inheritance too late. That is, we've already established our own financial position, and receiving it sooner might have, sort of fast-tracked that or certainly helped that. The first bit of advice I would give to people is look after yourself first. Because often, clients will come to me and say, Stuart, one of our goals is, retirement, of course, and the other goal is to kind of help our children. So I acknowledge that, but really what you need to do is concentrate almost entirely on yourself first, prioritize your own financial position without even having much regard to helping children. And then hopefully what that does, if you certainly follow the life cycle that we just spoke about, what that will probably do is put you in a situation where you have surplus assets. You've got more money than you'll ever need. And in that situation, you're then going to be in a fantastic position to be able to help children. And when we talk about helping children, as you would know, Michael, that they're going to need different types of help at different stages. Some kids might need a little bit more, a little bit less, and you want to be able to accommodate that in your plans as well. So to come up with a plan today, my kids are 16, so if I can't try to come up with a plan today to help them get into the property market, there's so much could change over the next 10 to 15 years. Who knows what that's going to look like, right? So it's just too hard. So my reaction then is the best thing I can do is build my own wealth as much and as successfully as possible, and then I've got heaps of opportunity to help them in the future. So I think that's the first comment that I would say is it's really good to think about it and to prioritize a part of your goal, but really it should be focused, on your own asset base.
And enjoy your life while you can. Enjoy what you've got before it's taken away from you, whether it's your health or other things. I agree with that. I think one of the other concerns people have is, what if I give it to them now and they get divorced? The statistics show that 30% or more of marriages break up. I used to jokingly say, in my blended family, we've got 6 kids and 2 of them or 3 of them are going to get divorced, but I don't know which they are. And unfortunately, now I do. And so therefore, we have set up our asset protection to have assets in the right structures so that the outlaws can't get at it. That's one of the considerations I think people have got. And the other one is, what if I give it to them and they waste the money? What would your answers be if your clients asked you those sort of things, Stuart?
So let's talk about wasting money first, because I find it's a really interesting one. So it's a fair concern to have. Like, you've worked hard for your money, and you've treated it very carefully because you have worked hard for it. Whereas if someone just gets a windfall gain, a gift, that they haven't necessarily worked for it. I actually find that in every situation I've had over the last 20 years, any one of my clients that's received an inheritance or a gift, whilst their parents are alive, of course, has treated it with probably more respect than their own money. So I actually haven't found that's a problem. Now, which is not to say it's never going to be a problem. I'd imagine it's not a good representative sample because most of my clients are pretty smart with money anyway. And
they've probably taught their kids good habits, haven't they?
They probably have. Yeah, you're right. Whereas if you've got a child that's very, that's not great with managing money and can't save and all those sorts of things, well, I imagine if you give them a gift, it's, you can't necessarily expect that it's magically going to change those behaviors. So I guess it depends on the individual you're giving and giving money to and how they've behaved. But in the main, I tend to not think that's a big problem. The asset protection things are a concern, of course, and something that needs to be addressed. Of course, there's 2 asset protection considerations. What happens to my money when I pass, which is really how my will is structured and how my assets are owned today. But also the distinct from that, if I make a gift to one of my sons and they're married, and then their marriage subsequently dissolves very soon after I've made that gift, well, that gift is then part of the marital asset pool. The spouse will have a share of that. The ex will have a share of that at some point, which most people want to kind of protect against. And so really the best way to do that is don't call it a gift. Make sure everyone understands it's a loan. I might want the money back one day. your child would probably guess that it's probably more of a gift than a loan. But as long as the spouse and really everyone understands it is a loan and it's a liability on your balance sheet until I say it's not, and try and make it as commercial as possible, have a loan agreement there. Don't necessarily need to charge interest. I mean, it would make it even tighter if you did, but you don't necessarily need to. And maybe have some security for that loan, like a caveat over the property or something. It makes it very much seem like a genuine loan rather than a gift. Then there's a greater chance that your money will be protected. It's not perfect because the family court really look through everything and try and understand the nature of something. So, but if everyone actually genuinely believes it's a loan, not a gift, then you've got a much greater chance. Of course, if you have a conversation and say, "Oh, we're going to give you this money," and then all of a sudden you turn around, "Well, actually, we want a loan agreement now just to protect ourselves," that's going to come back to bite you. So you've got to really, from the beginning, start calling it a loan rather than a gift. But that's really the best way to deal with it. And then eventually, maybe one day when you go, well, it is what I mean, because you can't control all the risks in life, of course. So one day you might wake up and go, well, you know what? If their marriage doesn't last, it is what it is, and I'll just move on. And you can then tell them one day, I'm never going to ask for this money back again. But again, it's something you just need to, I guess, navigate. The other thing you need to do is make sure that your will accommodates any early inheritances. That's called an offset clause. You'd have an offset clause in your will to say that, look, if I've got two sons, they're going to have an equal share in my estate. If I've given one son a couple of $100,000, but not to the other son yet because they haven't been ready or whatever circumstantial, I would want that rebalanced in my estate so that the son that had already got an early inheritance isn't going to get 50% of what's left. So you rebalance that in your will, and that's called an offset clause. So two things: you need to make sure that clause is in your will, and then you need to make sure that you do keep a kind of registry or list of gifts that you've given at different stages, and that your executor is aware of that list.
Now, another way of gradually transferring control, if you've got the right asset structures, is to give them slowly increasing shares of trusts or companies, different entitlements. And one day, once you see that they've got control, they can then take more responsibility for these assets.
Yeah, you've got to really consider the skills and abilities and desires of your beneficiaries. I've had situations where clients have inherited monies and they're not very financially savvy, and they feel an immense amount of obligation to make sure they make the right decision, but they don't really have the skill and experience to be able to execute on that. And it is a very stressful time for them because they're very appreciative, of course, but they just don't want to mess it up. And so I think it's really good to think about, who are my beneficiaries? Are they financially savvy? In which case they probably don't need too much of an introduction. But if you do have beneficiaries that aren't so financially savvy, then really gradually handing over control, talking to them about the money, talking to them how you manage your money, introducing them to your advisors, these sorts of things, making that transition a lot easier will certainly help that process, and also maximize the chance of that wealth being preserved for future generations as well.
Now, people listening to this are going to get an idea that you understand a bit about money and about tax and about accounting. So if people want to find out more, what do you do for your clients at ProSolution?
So we like to inspire our clients, Michael, to take a holistic approach to building wealth. So that ensures that the right hand knows what the left hand is doing. And, if we can sit around as a team and talk from a financial planning, from a mortgage broking, from a tax and accounting perspective, we ensure that we maximize all opportunities and minimize all risks for our clients, and ultimately help them achieve their longer term goals, dealing with many of the things that we've talked about today.
Well, I'll leave a link in the show notes to not just ProSolution, but also your great podcast and blog. And you talked about helping your clients gain wealth. Wealth means different things to different people. There's lots of different definitions of it. I think the highest form of wealth is the ability to wake up every morning and say, hey, I can do whatever I want to do. The ability to do what you want, when you want, with whom you want, for as long as you want. That's priceless. And this is the highest dividend that money pays. So we're talking about building money, building assets, becoming richer, not just for the sake of doing it, but to appreciate your life. And as you've just said, as we've discussed, to actually pass it on to others that are important to us. I think another great message from our chat today, Stuart, was that understand where you are in your journey and play the appropriate game for that stage of the journey. But it won't just happen unless you plan for it. So get some advice, let somebody help you plan, and then it's your job to implement the plan, Stuart.
Yeah, that's right. And you don't need to be an expert. You just need to know the general approach, generally the right approach. And then, as I said a few moments ago, just fill in the experts where those gaps are present. So you don't need to become the expert yourself. You just need to know which direction you're going to walk in and who's going to help you walk in that direction.
Perfect, because it's not going to happen unless you have a plan to make it happen. Yeah. Thanks for your time, Stuart. Look forward to catching up with you again real soon.
Thanks, Michael. It's been fun.
I hope you learned something from my chat with Stuart, and if you did, and you're not a subscriber to this podcast yet, why not just stop for a sec? In a moment, I'm going to share my mindset message with you, but just stop for a sec and click the follow button in whichever podcast app you're listening to, because Stuart's on this show regularly, and twice a week I bring you a heap of guests who have great insights into property, finance, money, tax. So I'd love you to be one of those many subscribers who gets our content twice a week. Now, I hope one of the other lessons you got from our chat with Stuart was the importance of planning and understanding where you are in your life cycle as a property investor, and that you've got to do the right thing at the right stage of the cycle. Now, I don't know where you are, and so this isn't specific advice, but it's a good time to consider getting into property because the evidence is in. We've passed the housing market bottom earlier this year, and the opportunity to get in at this stage of the cycle, the beginning of a new cycle, doesn't happen very often. But I hope what Stuart and I showed you was the importance of planning and understanding the right thing to do. So why not contact my team at Metropole at metropole.com.au, and I'll leave a link in the show notes, and have an obligation-free clarity consultation with one of our property strategists to help you discuss your goals, discuss what options you've got, and understand if what you're currently doing is going to help you achieve the goals you want. Now, be careful. You can't just hop into any property at this stage of the cycle. Even though it's the beginning of the cycle, each market's working very differently. And property investment is a process. You've heard me say that before. It's not an event. You can't just buy any property and hope to become successful, particularly moving forward where various sectors and various states are performing very differently. So formulating a property plan and getting the right advice is more critical than ever now. Why not have a chat with our team at Metropole? And we've got a range of services, but we don't sell property, so our advice is independent. Of course, we'd love to help you buy property using our buyer's agent service, but first we've got to give you some strategic advice to give you direction, results and certainty, and that's what our property plans do. metropole.com.au.
Now here's Michael's mindset message. Remember, a change in your thinking will lead to a change in your life.
Today's mindset message comes from a blog post by Dan Peterson, who wants to remind us about the importance of living in the present. It's a reminder to slow down, to breathe, and to realise the infinite potential that you are. He said, we're all trying to get somewhere, to a place where all our needs, all our desires are met. We all just want to be okay, to have a meaning, to be valued, to be at peace, to be happy, and to have fun. This is what we all chase, but most of the time we don't have it because we chase it. The chase clouds the moments. The chase blinds us to what we already have and to the availability of the peace in the here and now. The chase is a way of running from ourselves, said Dan Peterson. We can't have everything we want, but we can have peace, not just on the weekends or when we retire, but right now. Not at the bottom of the bottle, not through a paycheck, but within you. It's available to all of us right now, said Peterson. So he suggested, take it one day at a time. deal with what's in front of you right now instead of focusing on what hasn't or what may not work in the future. Things usually don't turn out the way we imagine they will, but they usually turn out the way they should. Right now is the only thing happening, and this is where it must end. If you make the best of the present, you'll make the most of your future, says Peterson. It's good to have goals and have a vision for the future, but don't let it cloud the moment. Anything worth accomplishing in the future is no more valuable than what you can experience at the present moment. Peterson said, death may come before our goals and dreams are accomplished, so don't forget that life is right now and may only be right now. What is worth doing or experiencing right now? What is worth the very little time you have left? Now, there's some interesting thoughts from Dan Peterson where he correctly says you've got to be grateful, you've got to be appreciative, you've got to enjoy what's happening. Now, he's not saying don't make long-term plans, because if you don't have goals, if you don't have plans, you're not going to get anywhere. But I think what he's trying to tell us is enjoy the journey, because if you don't enjoy the journey, you're not going to appreciate the destination when you get there. Well, thanks for spending the last little while with me, and I hope you got some benefit from this show. If you did, and you know somebody else who'd also benefit, please tell them about the Michael Yardney podcast. There's a share button on every podcast app. On Apple Podcasts, there's 3 little buttons down the bottom. Press it and share it, or just tell them about the Michael Yardney podcast. I hope you're going to be doing them a favour, and you'll definitely be doing me a favour and helping me in my quest to make as many people as possible financially literate. Now, there's ways of catching up with me between these shows. Just look for Michael Yardney on social media, or why not join my private Facebook group? Go to Facebook and look for the Property Update Facebook group. And I have a way of saying thank you to you for subscribing to this podcast. Go to podcastbonus.com.au. There'll be a link in the show notes, podcastbonus.com.au, where you can get a bunch of ebooks and reports, my way of saying thank you. And when you've got time, why not listen to some of the old podcasts? There's individual lessons in each of those that I think would be helpful for you. I'll be back again real soon. In the meantime, have a great week. Make it a great week.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Michael Yardney podcast, which was brought to you by Metropole, who help their clients grow, protect, and pass on their wealth through strategic property and wealth advice. If you like what you heard and don't already subscribe, you'll find us on iTunes or on your favourite Android app as the Michael Yardney podcast. Watch out for our next show, which comes to you twice a week, and you'll learn some new ideas about property investment, success, and money in around 30 minutes. To get more of Michael's thoughts, go across to www.propertyupdate.com.au and sign up for his daily morning briefing, and you'll hear from not only Michael but a group of leading property success and money experts. And just a reminder that the information you heard in this show today is general educational advice and not specific investment advice, as we don't know your personal circumstances. If you're looking for specific advice, why not ask the team at Metropole to help you?